Welcome to the Mental Health Multiverse.
We're your hosts,
HB
and LB.
We'll be breaking down some of our favorite movies and TV shows as they relate to mental health, self-healing, and overall wellness, while also breaking stigmas, shedding light on misinterpretations, and helping you understand yourself a little better.
If you're also on a healing journey and enjoy pop culture, stick around. Hello everyone, LB here again. Thank you so much for tuning in to part 2 of our Giselle episode where we talk about dissociation, consuming self-healing content versus integrating that content, surrendering control, developing emotional acuity, Easter eggs, cameos, and more. So stay tuned and thanks for being here.
I have a question for both of you, kind of related to this, kind of not. I'm not an expert in this by any means. So I'm the type of person who and I think LB you are too, who dissociated a lot as a kid because you had to like get out your mind had to kind of like get out of a situation. And I was thinking a lot about how even though Giselle is like a fairy princess who like came to the real world, in some ways you can think about her optimism and the ways in which she views the world as like dissociation, like as like a fantasy of like living in her head. Because like for me, I very much lived in my head through a lot of my like middle school through high school, like adolescence. It was very much like not grounded in any sort of reality, especially in my home life. And so like I'm wondering if there's any sort of discussion on a comparison between like Giselle's experience and what the experience of like living in your head and creating a fantasy world can do for you in times of like need or trauma.
Take it away, Emily.
Oh, I was ready for you to start. Yeah, I have similar experiences from my childhood, and it's not to say that it was a bad childhood, but it's just to say that yeah, I too like I used books as escapism, and then music as escapism, and was always finding ways to like build worlds in my head or romanticize experiences that I was having, which I don't think is a bad thing. I think I do that in my adult life too, because life is hard. And so like fully being able to enjoy what you can. Not to say that I lived through like rose-colored glasses, but like I romanticize experiences that are impactful or meaningful to me, to the full extent that I would in like a fantasy novel or something, you know? And I think like that is a really good point to bring up because yeah, it is a way of coping. It's not necessarily the best coping mechanism, but it's one that gets you through really hard things. And even now I disassociate. Really cool. And I don't think I have like a direct answer for that, but I think it is a good point to bring up because initially Giselle wasn't like disassociating or making things up to make herself feel better. She genuinely believed those things. And then as reality was setting in, she was like, no. Like Prince Edward's coming for me. It's going to be fine, And when Robert is like, are you sure though? Because in my experience, they don't come, they don't save you. And I think too, just like with his daughter, he was trying to prepare her for disappointment, for real life, for the option that like you're not going to get saved and you're going to have to save yourself. And I think in the end she did have to kind of save herself, true love's kiss aside, but I think it is a coping mechanism. And then in that moment or in those moments where she was like, wow, it's been a few days, like I don't know if he's really coming, she still was holding on to that hope that like he will come, he will save me from this situation.
Yeah, just like you said, Emily, it definitely is a survival and coping mechanism. I think sometimes it can be as extreme as what Giselle's doing, where it's kind of delusional. But I think more often a lot of people will dissociate or revert back to something that feels more comforting, whether it be real or made up just exactly for that, for comfort. I think the line where it starts to get maybe not so good or unhelpful is when we can't, there isn't anything to anchor us into reality. It's something we talked about like in our very first episode. I think our intro episode was mindful escapism, that there is a way to use books and music and media as a way to escape from things. But I think it's, what's that quote? It's like, no, the quote is about something different, but I think it can be applied here about like not resting here or like not staying here. That when we are escaping from hard times into something that feels better, that doesn't mean we need to forget about the thing we're escaping from and just like hoping it goes away. Maybe sometimes it will, but more often than not, when we keep running and we don't face the thing, it will come back to be in our face in a different way. So I think I just think that the important thing to not get swept up in those, in the dissociation, in the what Giselle is experiencing as delusions of grandeur. I think what I'm trying to say is that if believing in something gives you hope, like Giselle, where she believes Robert is coming, and it's not preventing her from living and being in the real world. I think a lot of that has to do with Robert, where she's not just like sitting around waiting for him. Like she's experiencing the world and she's living and she's getting out and she's
still living her life. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Quote unquote living her life. And I think that's like another trope. I mean, this whole movie is just like playing on the tropes of fairy tales where she's quote unquote waiting for a prince to save her, but she realizes that she doesn't have to.
Yeah.
I think to the extent that escapism and disassociating helps you get through a traumatic experience or a hard experience, while giving you time to like either delay processing or process in bits and pieces, is still okay, like healthy. But to the extent where it completely takes you out of reality and it does become like more delusional, that's where it becomes more dangerous. Because I think too, sometimes when you are escaping or disassociating, there's still things that crop up, like themes that are cropping up, and you are able to better connect them to your own life. And I think societally, we do turn to media to escape from the numerous unprecedented events that we have been living through, and the societal trauma of living during the pandemic. That is still ongoing. I think that like there is a lot of escapism because we're just trying to find something else to focus on. And it's not to say that we're not obviously still living through the actual experiences, but that it gives us something that our mind can take a break. Like, I think that's the reason that a lot of people do lean on fantasy or even reality TV. Like it's mindless, it's brainless, and our minds are working overtime all the time. There's so many things to juggle, just being alive and using your like executive functioning to do administrative things of life. And so I think it just it provides a break. I think disassociating and escapism can sometimes give you a break from having to be on and be processing or healing or working on something all the time.
Yes. Yeah. I'm so glad you said that about healing too, because I think there's this idea that the healing journey is supposed to be all consuming or all encompassing. And it's something, yes, it is a process. It's a lifelong process. But like you are allowed to take breaks in the same way that you take breaks from anything, because
work,
it's
you have your like, you know, you have working hours.
Yeah, like it's just, it's a balance. And so I think so much of what we talked about today and in this movie is just finding a balance. It's not about like over being overly positive or overly pessimistic. It's about being able to hold the both. And it's not about like in healing, it's not about consuming every single piece of media and because I mean I did this, like I
and
read
self-help and
exactly. Like I
Mhm.
read so many self-help books, and it got to the point where I just like I was reading so many things, but I wasn't integrating them into my life. And I think that's like another thing too, is you can know all of these things, but if we're not applying it to our life, then it's not really doing us the service that it can be or that we are expecting it to, because knowing is not the same as experiencing it,
Practicing. Yeah.
practicing it. Yeah. And I think Giselle does that like with anger, right? Like I think Robert gives her the word anger, or but she like knows about it, but it's not until she experiences it she's like, oh, this is what
Yes.
it is, and this is how I like work through it. So
What are your thoughts on it, Heather? And I mean, I feel like you ask a question, you usually have your own thoughts as well.
Well, I mean, my thought was really just that it was like I hadn't thought about it until we started talking, and I was just thinking about how I spent so much of my life in this like fantasy world, that it kind of like reminded me of the way in which Giselle interacted with the real world was just like from this place of um from this place of like not being grounded in any sort of like reality. Um and so my thought really is, I mean, it's similar to what y'all are saying. And I'm also glad I asked, but um, I do think that like there are places where it serves you and there are places where it doesn't. And I think that I like the conversation that we've had sort of about how like, you know, having optimism and having hope and living in your fantasy world um can be helpful, but you do also have to have a sense of reality to get through the hard things, because if you stay in the fantasy, none of the problems that you have or are dissociating from will ever actually be solved. Like sometimes they may work themselves out, um but you know, and I think there's also a sense of like surrendering what you do and do not have control over too. um you know, I think that's another thing is like, you know, we have control over certain things in our life, but we also don't have control over a lot. And so it's like, what about this situation that is making me want to dissociate do I have any control over in the first place? um and for me, the way I've had to sort of ground myself in reality, because I spent so much of my younger years living in the fantasy world, was with help from multiple therapists, was discovering discovering what I can do that I have control over, and and surrendering what I don't. And so like I think that has been really helpful for me in grounding myself in reality, is just like, is the control that I do or do not have over any given situation or circumstance. Because I think my first reaction when something bad happens, my first reaction I think is to have an out of body experience and to sort of be like, oh, this is not happening, goodbye. You know. um and so like really grounding myself and like saying, okay, well, what's the first step? Like what like, is this something I need to talk to someone about? What does someone need to know? Um is there something I need to do? And like I don't think it has to happen like right away either. Um but I think Giselle is a good example of that if we choose to look at her fantasy life as dissociating, right? Like um she still has the optimism that the prince is going to come, but she is also grounded in reality and living the life in the real world. And she's also got help from others, which I think is another good point to make too. Is that like, you know, we have people in our lives who can help ground us. There are things that you can do that can help ground you. And escaping is great and it's fine and it's a good coping mechanism, but it can't be the only one. It can't be all you turn to, I think, in a hard time. I think having a toolbox or building a toolbox is really essential. It's the same thing for this is something that I learned when I was learning about, you know, intuitive eating and that kind of thing, is that like a lot of people see emotional eating as like a bad thing, quote unquote bad thing. Like they think, oh, when I'm sad, I eat a cookie and that's not okay. It is okay if you're sad to eat a cookie, but eating the cookie can't be your only coping mechanism for being sad, right? And so I think it's the same thing with dissociation. Like it's okay to dissociate when you're going through something hard, and it can help you, but it can't be the only thing that you use to get through.
Yeah. Just like any coping mechanism, it serves a purpose. And then there are times when you recognize it's no longer serving that purpose, and it's okay when it doesn't. I think a lot of what we just talked about does come down to like nervous system regulation. Cause like I was thinking about when something happens, people will go into fight, flight, freeze, fawn, feign, you know, and in the moment it might be helpful and it might serve a purpose. But when we're constantly fawning over and over and over again to survive, we then go into people pleasing. And after so many years of chronically doing it, we find that because we're saying yes to all these other people, we're saying no to ourselves. Or when we're constantly running away, flying away from our problems, like dissociating, then we're not actually addressing them. And then we have this like, now instead of having one or two things on our plate to address, we have like a whole pile of things, and that can be a lot more daunting, and that just makes it even scarier and makes us want to just keep flying, you know? So I think so much of what we just talked about is developing the awareness and the emotional acuity to recognize when these things serve us. Like there's a time and a place to either address or to wait, or to, you know, feel the feels or hold off until, I don't know, we just feel safer or ready. And I think a lot of that is just like really connecting with ourselves, really connecting with our nervous system, and whether that be like taking time on the regular to set that time for yourself, or therapy, I think, is a really good tool for that kind of thing. I know a lot of people think of therapy as like a thing you only do when severe crisis or trauma happens, but I think therapy or even coaching can be a really good tool just to reconnect with ourselves, develop that awareness, and then build the toolbox that we just talked about of different coping mechanisms. So
yeah, I think it's good maintenance, but also it's not always a perfect fit for everyone. So there's room for that as well.
Yes, that's true. Therapy is not, and that's the thing too, is that like therapy isn't the cure all, right? Like a therapist isn't going to fix you. The therapy sessions aren't going to heal you. It's the
you actually have to do the work.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's the work that you're doing in session. It's the work that you're doing out of session. And it's okay if like you're not ready to do that. So like speaking from personal experience, and I feel like this is relevant, I don't know. Like this year has not been great. The first couple months were not great, and I had a therapist at the time for a different thing, and I just like I kept pushing our sessions, and then in the sessions I like couldn't really talk about it because, and not to say that I was avoiding, I was very much like dealing and processing with it, but I wasn't ready to externalize yet. I like to think that I'm a very self-aware person, and I can kind of like work through things, especially in therapy. I found a lot of I have had many a breakthrough in therapy and in coaching, but a lot of that is having to do on my part of participating. And I wasn't in a place where I could participate. I was in like full shutdown mode. And that's not to say that was bad. It was just my process. And I think everyone has their own process, and everyone has a very different way of healing and getting through something. But the important thing is just like not staying there. I think that's the quote I was referencing before, where like you can rest here, but we can't stay here. And I think when dissociation happens, or when the shutdown happens, or whatever coping mechanism, survival tactic kicks in, recognizing and acknowledging that it's serving its purpose right now, but we can't stay here, but we can use it and have it work for us until we're ready to move on and address the thing.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the themes that we've talked about so far have been naivete.
Naivete.
Like, Heather, take it away.
Yeah. And expectations, goals, adapting to change, love, and toxic positivity. But do either of you feel like there was another theme from this movie that we didn't address?
No, but I want to say that there were a lot of like little Easter eggs. We've talked about how Giselle doesn't represent like any one princess, but there are a bunch of like princess storylines that are represented. There's poison apples and an evil queen that turns into a witch and a magic mirror, which are all very Snow White. There's she leaves her slipper, and so it's very Cinderella, and dressing up for the ball, having to get ready for that.
Wait, can we talk about how ugly her dress is at the end?
Wait, which one?
The purple one at the king and queen ball or whatever.
Oh, I liked it, but I just thought it was so modern versus
it
what
was
the
so out of
theme
place
of the ball was. But it was just very modern. It actually gave me very mermaidy vibes, but
okay.
I liked it.
I didn't like it, but I also think that the goal was to sort of be like, she is detaching from the princess mindset and is becoming a little bit more realistic. And so I think that's why the design choice. But I agree. I was like, come on, this is the dress you gave her?
But she was dressed the whole time like as a princess and had her hair all big and with like butterflies and giant curls. And so this is her as like a real life woman, I liked it. I actually thought it was a nice like juxtaposition. Because they were all playing dress up, but that was her life. And she was coming out of that. Also, I want to say, so Easter eggs, but there were also a lot of like cameos. Jodie Benson, who voices Ariel in The Little Mermaid, was Robert's assistant. At one point, Prince Edward is flipping through channels and there's a soap opera going on, and the woman actress is actually the voice of Belle from Beauty and the Beast. And when Prince Edward is going door to door trying to find Giselle, there's a woman who answers the door with a bunch of kids, and she says, "You're too late," as if like Prince Charming's too late. She already had all this stuff happen. She is the voice of Pocahontas, which she's a white lady, so we're gonna. Pocahontas is problematic. I think you guys have already had an episode on this, and so you probably already discussed. But she was the voice of Pocahontas. And then one other cameo, I'm probably missing some. But another cameo that I thought was really sweet is when they're in Central Park and doing the whole like, "That's how she'll know that you love her" song. There is like some older people dancing, and a couple of them are actually chimney sweeps from Mary Poppins. And similar to the chimney sweeps themselves, they have like flowers that look like it. And so that was really cute. I feel like I'm missing other ones. Also, I thought it was really neat that, Idina has played multiple princessy roles later on, went on to do Queen Elsa and Frozen, but she actually didn't sing in this one, which I appreciated because this was before she kind of got not necessarily a Broadway break, but like her break in Disney broadly. She does sing in Disenchanted, but I appreciate that she didn't sing in this one.
It was nice because then I think had she sung, Elsa would have, I don't know, like people would just like it was nice because Elsa gets to be like her own character and her own princess. But I feel like had Idina sang Jesus in this one, then everyone would just be like, "Oh, she sounds like this character. She's just like this other character." But there's like enough separation, so.
I also think it's funny that she actually is a Disney princess.
Yeah.
Nancy is a Disney princess. So I guess Idina Menzel is like two separate Disney princesses now, even though Nancy, I'm sure, is not canonically considered a Disney princess. She like is.
Neither is
Queen
Giselle,
Nancy.
yeah, Queen Nancy of Andalasia.
Uh-huh.
One of the fun facts or things I noticed in this watch through was when Giselle is at the office
Yeah.
and looking at the fish, part of your
Mhm.
world starts playing in the background, which I thought was really
Mhm.
cute. Oh, and then when Jodie Benson's character is talking to Robert and she like puts on her princess voice to imitate Giselle. And then when Edward is flipping through the channels before like the you know how soap operas have like their music cues or whatever, it starts playing like the first 3 or 4 notes are the opening Disney
Tale as old
thing.
as time.
No,
Oh
it's
no.
like
Oh, the opening sequence.
yeah,
Like
like the yeah. Which I guess is when you wish upon a
yes.
star. Yeah, that one.
Mhm, mhm.
And it's like it starts that, but it doesn't end on star, it ends on like a really sour note actually because it's a soap opera. But I didn't know that that was the voice of Belle. That's really cool.
Very fun facts.
Something we like to address is how the characters or movie relate to some kind of journey, whether that be fitness or healing. I feel like HB did a really good job at comparing Giselle's happily ever after in terms of having a very fixed goal to a fitness journey. And I think we've touched a little bit on a healing journey, so I won't like go too much into it. But Emily, do you feel like there are any other things that can be related that maybe we haven't talked about yet?
I mean, I think just developing as a person, I think at the very beginning of the movie, and obviously when Prince Edward finds Giselle, he expects her to be the same as she was when he left her or when he lost her, when she left Andalasia, and she's changed. And it comes as a shock to her because she's been living every day with herself. And ironically, she doesn't sing with him, but she does continue to sing with Robert and Morgan. So it's just that moment that she's like, I don't feel
Yeah.
like singing with you anymore. Um, but just that development of like, you don't see your own growth when you're living with yourself day to day. And that there is development as people based on your experiences and as you're growing as a human, you can't expect to always stay the same. And I think that was kind of a turning point for her and a turning point for Prince Edward to see is like, well, she's not the same as when she was in Andalasia. And she was like, I actually like who I'm becoming and I want to continue delving into this, even though I don't know what it looks like. And as we've talked about with like healing, I just want to point out like the growth journey as well, and that there's a lot of unknowns in the future, obviously, but there's a lot of unknowns in the present too. And I think she handled that with a lot of grace. And I think that's really hard to do.
That's such a good point. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. There was something you said that made me think of something and now I forgot. Oh, mindset. I think surprisingly, I didn't anticipate having this thought. But now that we've been talking, I think there is a lot of like mindset work too that we can see in this movie. I think the two predominant ones are like the fixed mindset versus growth mindset, especially around like goals where this is the goal that I have to work toward and there's no wiggle room unless it looks and feels and happens in this way, whereas growth mindset says like this is something I'm working toward, but I'm also allowing for things to adapt and change as I adapt and change working toward this goal. So that's I really liked what you said about change because along the way, whether it's the goal that's changing or us ourselves changing, change is inevitable. It's the only constant we have in this world. I'm throwing out all the cliches right now, but I think it's important to recognize what Heather you were saying too earlier in the episode when we reach a goal or we get to a goal or we're getting closer to it, recognizing like either we've outgrown it or we've changed and that's no longer necessarily the goal. Or Emily, to your point, we get there and we're like, okay, this isn't exactly what I thought it would be, and I don't know really what to do, but like I'm here now. And I think the growth mindset really allows for adaptability and literally in the name growth. So another thing I really like to talk about is perfectionism. And I think adopting a growth mindset is a really good antidote to perfectionism that also says something's not worth doing unless it's exactly how I want it to go. And the growth mindset says, it has so much compassion too, and it says I can work toward the thing, and even if it doesn't look exactly how I pictured it, it's okay, and that doesn't mean necessarily anyone failed. I think even, again, I'm just like throwing out all the cliches, but it really does boil down to like prioritizing how life feels over what it looks like. I think so much of our society puts so much pressure on our identity being about external things, about our of our resume, really, like, you know, what you do for work, where you live, your friends, your um I don't know, just like things, you know, and I like that, or at least maybe it's just my corner of the world and the people in my life. But I am noticing a shift of, it's less about all of the achievements and the awards and the quote unquote, I don't know, just like the things, and it's more focused on like happiness and how you're feeling and whether or not you're actually loving and living life and the quality of
Mm-hmm.
life that you have. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's just beautiful. And I am grateful to have friends like you, Emily, and you, HB, to have those kinds of people in my life that remind me of those things, especially as entrepreneurs working toward a goal. And sometimes we don't meet those goals. And sometimes where I'm at right now, things have to kind of pause, and it's just a not right now, but that doesn't mean it's that all or nothing, where like
Mm-hmm.
if you're not working toward it right now, then it's done, it's over. And it's okay for things to be a process, because like we talked about, in a fairy tale, it's happily, and they live happily ever after, that's the ending. But there's so much more after that. um and just remembering that it's okay. It's I don't know, it's just like it's okay to work at something, because I think that's the other thing too, is there's this idea that if it takes a lot of work and effort, it's not it's not the thing for you. That things
Or
that
if
are
you're
meant for
seen
you,
putting effort into things.
yes, like it should be effortless, especially
Mm-hmm.
like the monologue from Barbie, which I'm sure Heather can quote at this point.
We have to do a different episode on that because you can't keep referencing it when we're not
I
talking about that
know we
one.
should. We really should. We should let it email us. Let us know in the comments if we should do an episode on Barbie, because I would love to do that. Um, but all of that to say, yeah, there are certain expectations about how things and life are supposed to look. It's supposed to look, especially as a woman, effortless, and that's not always the case, because real life is work. Real
Yeah.
life is sometimes hard work, and there's nothing wrong with hard work. But again, balancing out with the fun, childlike wonder things, as to avoid burnout and that kind of stuff. So anyway,
Well, and we
Yeah.
never, I mean, even in this movie, we never see Giselle actually sew her dress. We just see the cutouts in the curtain, or we never see her fully get ready, but like it takes a long time to get
yeah.
ready, you know? Another theme that I do also want to point out is, and it's not as much focus on Giselle as it is Robert, which I know this episode is about Giselle, but
Mhm.
he had experienced something really hard. I mean, solo parenting is hard, and he had given up like hope and faith that he could have true love or have fun. And Giselle opened that window for him, and just as like a post trauma thing,
Mhm.
it's really hard to see like a light at the end of the tunnel, or see something more, or even like a depressive thing, you know, like it's really hard to see something good coming or something positive in the future, because what you're feeling is currently all you're feeling, and you can't see a way
Yeah.
outside of it. And so I think that's also like a theme that you kind of see as there's like that growth mindset, but just kind of linking it with another thing as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. That's such a good point. Do either of you, oh, Heather, something you teased but didn't say yet, but now we are here at this part of the episode. What is your favorite quote from the movie?
Okay, I have a couple. Um, this quote in the movie made me cry, so I'm probably gonna cry saying it now too. Um, everybody has problems, everybody has bad times. Do you sacrifice all the good times because of them? And that is
Hmm.
the couple who Giselle brings back together, because they realize that they're still in love, even though they were going through a divorce. And as you said at the beginning, they are losing a lot of money because they spent all this money on divorce lawyers, and now they're deciding not to get divorced. But I just really love that quote because I think it's like, I think one thing that we were just talking about that we didn't see a ton of in the movie is that true love takes work. Like a lot of the, like, if you think about the theme of the movie being true love, like it just happens. And that's how they're like showing it, is like true love just happens and you find the person and you kiss them and you're in love. But I think that small quote from this couple kind of reminds you that, like, you know, it is work. True love is work. And I think that
it's a
the quote is
choice.
also, and it's a choice. Yeah, exactly. And I think that this quote is also one of the reasons that I'm crying, is because it's like, you also have to decide when the good times don't outweigh the bad times, right?
Yes.
So it's like, everybody has problems, everybody has bad times. Do you sacrifice all the good times because of them? And it's like, well, you might have to, you know? And so I think that's a reason that this quote really resonated with me, is because, you know, sometimes the bad times do outweigh the good times, and you do have to say, this isn't serving me anymore, and it's time for me to move on.
Yeah.
And then to take it to like a cheesy, the happily ever after song that's at the end, I don't know who sings it.
Carrie Underwood.
Is it really?
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah.
So the happily ever after song at the end, there's again, it's like, it's sort of optimistic, but it reminds me of a quote that's said all the time. It's, each happy ending's a brand new beginning. And I really like that framing, because it's like the quote that's like, when one door closes, another door opens, kind of. Because like, again, we keep talking about, like, when you think of a happy ending, like there's nothing after that. Like a happily ever after is like the end. But that quote from this sort of means that, like, okay, a happy ending, like something you had your happy ending, but that's the beginning of something. A happy ending is the beginning of something new. So it's like, someone's happily ever after is actually starting a new story, I think, is like what that means too, in a way. So, and, you know, it doesn't have to be a happy ending either. It could be a bad ending, it could be a whatever ending, but it's like choosing to look at endings as something else beginning. I think I kind of liked that too.
Right, kind of like you finish a chapter and it's just another chapter in the same book, you know.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's a transition period between them, you know, like an intermission. But then
yeah, it's the photo break of the book, when there's like artwork
right.
and fancy and cute little pictures, and then we get into
or
the
it's
next
when
thing.
You have to wait. It's when the author hasn't finished the next book yet, and you have to wait for the sequel.
Exactly. Yep. Exactly. I didn't write down any quotes because I personally didn't have anything stand out to me for like the first time, I think. So Emily, what about you? Were there any quotes you took away from the movie?
I mean, the song and dance sequence in Central Park is always the one that stood out to me. And I think it aligns too with like a common theme right now of like, she's like, well, how is she gonna know that you love her unless you tell her and show her? And that like meme of like, how are they gonna know? They're not gonna know. How are they gonna know? You know, like it's just the
right. It's not as obvious as
unless you're intentional and forthright, people can't read your mind and they can't know how you're feeling or thinking or what to expect unless you tell and show them.
Yeah,
right. I think I do like that, because I think especially in relationships there can be this idea that when you're in a relationship you just assume that
the other person knows.
Yeah, that the other person knows how you feel, the other person can read your mind or know all of your expectations for them, for how the relationship is supposed to go, but it's not always like that, and you do have to communicate. And I think that's not even just romantic relationships, even though that's like obviously a big heavy theme, but I think even in friendships,
I was just gonna say that.
yeah in a lot of different,
all of them.
yeah, all the relationships require communication, and like loving and honest communication. And I think what's also important is identifying and recognizing the people that you can have those conversations with. Something that I really like that I've adopted in my adult years is, you know, I don't have all of the same friends I did in high school, and it's really easy to see, or it's really easy to say like, wow, I only have X amount of friends, or wow, I'm not friends with these people anymore. But something I like to kind of see it as now is I'm just making room for the people who better support me, better love me, better understand me. Kind of like, again, here I go throwing a cliche, like, you know, would you rather have 100 pennies or 4 quarters, kind of a thing in terms of friendship. Obviously there's a lot of nuance there, and people's value can't be quantified into pennies and quarters, but you know what I'm trying to say. Anyway,
and I think that's also like the sunk cost theory, which is a psychology term of like the amount of time or effort or energy or resources that you have put into something. The more that you put in, the more you feel like you have to stick with it, because you've already put in all of this X, Y, and Z. So therefore you have to continue on. And sometimes the better thing to do is to cut your losses and do something different.
Yeah. And I think that's also a cultural thing. Like, I think if we relate it to this movie, Giselle's resources and time is building the mannequin of the prince, I guess. And like all the time she spent singing and dreaming about what her happily ever after is going to be. And I think as a society and our culture, it says like when you've invested a lot of time and effort into something, you just like have to stick with it. Like this is your lot in life now. Otherwise you've wasted. I think that's like another thing that gets thrown around is like, if you don't reach the finish line, then you've wasted your time, your money, other people's time, other people's money. And I think that also then triggers a lot of perfectionism of like, you just have to know, you have to choose the right thing right now and stick with it for the rest of your life. And that's just not like fair to anyone. And I don't think it's a waste to change your mind. I think most things can be seen as a learning experience, and you learned that this just was not your thing. This wasn't the thing for you. And congratulations on learning that about yourself. And now you can go find the thing that fits better. How exciting is that?
Giselle learned she didn't want to be a princess, and Nancy learned she was a queen. So
yeah, I do kind of love though how in the end Giselle gets like the quote unquote real life experience, and then Nancy gets the fantasy. Which is I don't know, I kind of like that. I think that is sweet. I just don't love that Giselle's reason for staying is true love, because I would like it to a man. I would like it to be more like Barbie, where it's like it's worth it to stay. It's like it's worth all of the hard times, it's worth all of the good times, and I want to experience all of it.
And I think largely she did stay for Morgan, because even when they were parting, she was like, I'm going to miss you. And she was like, I'm going to miss you too. And I'm never going to forget you. She didn't say that to Robert. She said that to Morgan.
Yeah. That is so true. That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, he's not my favorite character, but is hilarious. And when I started watching it last night, my boyfriend's name is Nathaniel. And I always point out Nate's and Nathaniel's and Nathan's in movies and TV shows or whatever. And he's, because more often than not, they're always like not a good character. Like they're not the character you want to root for. And he always gets so upset. He's like, give the Nathaniels someone to root for. Give us good representation.
That's funny.
And what struck me about Nathaniel is that he later on went and played the Weasley's pet rat in Harry Potter. Yeah, that's him.
He's Peter Pettigrew.
Peter Pettigrew. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
I did not notice that. I don't know why, because I usually have a thing for like the faces and stuff. How funny. That's funny. Yeah.
Sorry, but you're saying Pip.
Oh no, it's okay. Speaking of Nathaniel, because we like didn't talk about him at all this episode. Real quick, I love how they're showing everyone's like quote unquote happy endings or whatever, and his is a self-help book about how to defeat the evil queen within. So
He chose himself, which is great.
so
It's
I
still a
love
good
that.
lesson.
Yes.
He was like, why would I choose this abusive relationship? I'm gonna choose me.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think we could have done a whole episode on when he realizes from that soap opera scene that like he doesn't like himself, and it's like, oh, he like asks the prince like, do you like yourself? And he's like, yeah, what's not to like? Um and so like I think that was interesting. And then when he's on the phone at the very end with like, I think it's one of those like fortune tellers who you could call and they would like give you, or like advice
Oh,
columns or
yeah.
something.
Mhm.
And he asks a question about like, I don't think that she likes me and I don't think it's worth it to be in this relationship anymore. And the fortune teller is like, find out how she really feels about you. And then she pops up and she's like, hello, worthless.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
there you
That's
go.
probably my favorite quote.
we could do a whole episode on their relationship and stuff,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
And I think
maybe
you
in
guys have
our
only focused on women characters in all of your other episodes, correct?
We do.
yes,
Yeah.
Yeah.
this season is mainly focused on empowering Disney heroines, but I think in a future season we're going to talk about Disney villains, and so maybe we can talk about this particular evil queen and her
I
relationship
do
with
love Susan Sarandon.
Daniel.
So
She was great. Yeah.
Yeah, because I also have the same body image things to talk about the evil sidekick is always a plus size man, like whatever, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But one other thing about body
Unless
image
it's
before we
Kronk.
wrap up. Yeah, that's true. One other thing about body image that I want to say before we wrap up is something that I think was like intended to be a joke and it is fine, is how the little chipmunk is just like really heavy somehow, like how he is like he like weighs things down. And so at the beginning, and I didn't remember any of this until this watch was like me recognizing any of this, but he like, you know, at the very beginning, and he's like trying to help the princess get away from the troll and all of that, and he realizes that like he like sinks the branch down because he's so heavy for a chipmunk or whatever, and he's like, I gotta lay off the nuts. And so I'm like, oh, I don't know that I love that joke. But then in the end, he sort of realizes it as like a strength, and he uses it to help Giselle with the evil dragon when the queen turns into a dragon at the end, which is a nod to Maleficent. And he uses his like heavy chipmunk weight to like bring the dragon down off of the building and inevitably shatters her into glitter. So I was like, okay, I guess I like the spin on this, that we're using the fact that he's a heavy chipmunk as like a strength and something that he is proud of about himself. And I don't know, it was just a little something that I made a note of for body image for sure.
Heather, who is your favorite character? I think, well, Marissa, you were saying something about Pip, and then I cut you off. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Pip is so funny. I really love his reenactment trying to tell Edward that like that Nathaniel's a bad dude, and his like Giselle and the apple, and he's like eat it, and she's like and I don't know if if I could necessarily say he's my favorite, but he did give me a lot of laughs, so I think he was cute. I like him a lot. What about you, Heather?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess Giselle is my favorite. I think I really like the journey that she goes on. If I had to pick someone who wasn't Giselle, I would say Morgan. I think she's just like, you know, just a sweet kid who and I think she helps sort of like keep the story going in a really unique way, just by sort of being the childlike wonder that they have, and you know, giving like all of the main characters something to like protect or look after. And I also really love the sequence when she takes Giselle shopping. She's like, Dad says that this is only for emergencies. Also, though, why was she home alone in the middle of the day? That was, as she said she's only 6 years old, so I was thinking about that, like, why was she home alone? What's happening here?
Preparing her for the real world.
I guess, yeah.
of like, you're soon gonna have to be living on your own, so you better learn how to fend for yourself.
Yeah, I'd say Morgan was my favorite as well. I yeah, I think she's my favorite as well. I will say my least favorite was probably Prince Edward. I just didn't like him. He
He's
was
very
dumb.
one note. Yeah,
He's super one note. He's not like a complex character, and he's an annoying character. I think Nancy deserved better. So I think Nancy would be my secondary favorite. Like, she genuinely was trying to build a relationship, and she was trying to be like, really forgiving and open and understanding of Robert, of Morgan, of her relationship with both. And I think she picked a really healthy path of being like, hey, it's not me. And that sucks, but it's okay because this is your person. And I think that we don't get to see that a lot. And there was no like jealousy or animosity. She didn't try to, upend that relationship or, try to undermine Giselle. She just was like, it's not me. And that is okay,
Yeah.
So I really appreciate her and Morgan.
Yeah, I think speaking of the theme of love, I think part of love is recognizing or just like putting their happiness above like all else in a healthy way, not in a people pleasing way. But just recognizing like what Nancy did that wasn't my, and I like too that when she's saying that, it's not that she's like giving him permission in any kind of way, that she's just like,
it's acceptance.
Yeah, exactly.
Because he wasn't even willing to accept it. He was like, oh, it can't be. There's no way. And she was like, it's you.
Yeah, it's
just
you.
That like foresight.
Hurry up and kiss her, please.
Thank you. and you were talking about cliches and stuff, but it's the like, let it go. And if it was meant to be, it'll come back to you. Or what's meant for you won't miss you, Because you were talking about cliches earlier. And so I appreciated this one.
They're cliches, but I think they hold, some truths and can be helpful. It can be helpful or comforting when you're ready to accept them. So anyway, well, thank you, Emily, so much for your amazing input and all of your thoughts and feelings. And just thank you for your time and energy and for being here. I'm so happy we had you.
Absolutely. This is actually a lot of fun.
Yeah, we'll have to have you back for the Barbie episode. And listeners, if you have any thoughts, comments, feels, you know where to email us or comment on our social media stuff. And we'll talk to you next time.
Yay!
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Mental Health Multiverse podcast and for spending time with us, HB and LB. Special shout out to our musical composer, Little HB.
If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, feel free to share it with others, post about it on social media, leave a rating and review, or become an exclusive Patreon member to see bonus and additional content.
To stay up to date on all things MHM, you can follow us on Instagram at Heather Bodie and at littlebin_notbroken, or subscribe to our YouTube channel to see our faces and watch some fun bloopers. You can find all of these links in the show notes.
Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.